On this edition of the Table of Content, we are joined by retired Air Force officer Antony Barone Kolenc. We're going to ask him how he went from Air Force to Catholic fiction writer. Stay tuned, that's coming up next, right here on the Table of Content. Thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of the Table of Content. I am your host, Albert Sines, and we have the pleasure of being joined by Antony Barone Kolenc. Tony, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
We are so glad to have you on board. I'm really looking forward to this episode. But before we get into it, I want to give the listeners an opportunity to learn a little bit more about who you are. And as I nodded to in the introduction, you are a retired Air Force officer. So from that point, I was hoping you could give our listeners a little more information.
Sure. I actually grew up in New Jersey and was in the Air Force for 21 years. Prior enlisted, did a little bit of time as a firefighter and then a military intelligence officer before the Air Force actually sent me to law school, which was very nice, in Florida. And I spent the last 14 years of my career as a JAG officer, as an attorney in the Air Force, and got to travel all around the United States and see different parts of the world with my wife Elisa and our 5 children. And then we eventually settled in Jacksonville, Florida after I retired in 2012 and began teaching at law school.
Okay, well, that's a good synopsis of your sort of major profession that has taken up a good chunk of your life. But let's get to the really fun question. How do you go from being a retired Air Force officer who specialized in law, is teaching law school, and yet now you are writing Catholic fiction? How did that happen?
Well, I've always wanted to be an author, and of course, as you go through your life and you grow in your faith, you try to find ways to use the gifts that God gave you to and somehow further God's kingdom. And I guess that's kind of what happened with me. I've written throughout my whole life and tried to write fiction a lot, even as a kid, and none of it was any good. And even throughout most of my adult life, whenever I tried to write something fiction, I usually stopped and gave up after a while. But finally, with this latest effort, which I did begin actually probably about maybe 5 years before I retired, I finally was able to succeed at completing a novel that definitely, does appeal to Christian Catholic readers, but also can appeal to a broader mainstream audience.
Okay, well, I want to get into that series, obviously, but I'm curious. You said you started trying to write this series 5 years before you retired. So, what's the math? What's the timeline on this? How long have you been trying to bring this story to life?
You know, uh, I got the idea for the story. We were a homeschooling family. Now my kids are grown up at this point. But my son, when I started this, was 12 years old. And we were homeschooling, and there wasn't a lot of great Catholic fiction that we'd seen out there. And Harry Potter was, all over the place, and kids were loving all that. And we were traveling from law school in Florida to Colorado, and just started talking with my son, like, hey, if we were going to see like a good, interesting, fiction series that would be interesting to a teenager, but would also maybe have some, good themes in it, some good family values and faith, what would such a book look like? And so my son and I, along with a little bit of my wife too, were really just brainstorming this idea as I was traveling to my next duty assignment. And then when I got to my next duty assignment, I kind of suddenly got inspired and just, was writing early in the mornings for several hours for a few months. And that was the first draft of what eventually became Shadow in the Dark, book one in the Harwood Mysteries.
So, what are we looking at here? Maybe about 15 years of work to bring it to where it is now?
Yes, I've gone through many versions of this book, and Like many of your readers, I'm sure, we've all, wanted to write throughout our lives, and you get better with practice. And right around the time that I got really serious about writing this book, I joined the Catholic Writers Guild, and was exposed to a lot of other Catholic writers who I didn't even know existed out there. And they were very competent in their craft, and through my interactions with them, I was able to continue to develop the book, and eventually, God sort of landed a contract with Loyola Press into my lap, and then Loyola hired some great editors to work with me. And over the course of, I would say, the last 3 or 4 years, we really got the books into a final form that I am really proud of, and very happy with.
Well, I want to make sure that just the listeners hear that you were dedicated to this story for about 15 years, and that it's a testament to your dedication and really wanting to bring this story out to the world. So, listeners, if any of you out there are obviously considering writing, stick with it. I think that's the short synopsis here, and maybe we'll try and dig a little bit more into Tony's writing background later on. But I want to get into the stories. You already nodded to the first book and the series, The Harwood Mysteries. And I'm going to let you give some more kind of information here. But basically, we have a series of books that are set in England in the past, I believe 12th century England. And we have a young man who has encountered a lot of hardships in his very young life. He's about 11 when it starts. And you kind of follow him through his journey of life, trying to figure out who he is. There's faith elements, there's adventure elements, there's a lot going on here. So, with that sort of intro, can you sort of give a little bit more breadth to the story? Of course, with not giving away too much to the listeners.
Absolutely. Yeah, the Harwood Mysteries are named after the Abbey, Harwood Abbey, where this boy Zan winds up, and in the first book, Shadow in the Dark. And it's got, currently there are 3 books. The third book is coming out in July 2021. But Shadow in the Dark was book 1. The Haunted Cathedral was book 2. The Fire of Eden is book 3. And actually, I'm finishing up book 4. Actually, as we speak, before this interview, I was working on it. But so it's a series from Loyola Press. It's 12th century England, and it starts off with this boy Zan, who is in this village, and his village gets attacked by bandits, and he winds up losing his memory and his family, and he winds up at this Benedictine abbey, essentially being raised by the monks there for a while. And he meets his best friend, Lucy, our main girl character in the series. And the two of them, over the course of these books, wind up solving several pretty spooky mysteries. The first book, Shadow in the Dark, as its name implies, deals with the shadowy figure that is roaming the abbey grounds at night. And the kids at the abbey are convinced that this is, in fact, the Grim Reaper coming to take their souls, the Angel of Death. And in the second book, The Haunted Cathedral, Zan and Lucy have to determine if this cathedral in Lincoln, England, is actually haunted by the ghost of a little girl. And then the third book, The Fire of Eden, is a kind of a jewel theft story where Zan has to figure out who stole this priceless ruby on the night before the ordination of one of the monks.
So let me get this clarified for the listeners right now. Is this a fantasy series?
It is not. It is historical fiction. And Loyola Press has actually done a nice job in the books explaining to the readers, what does it mean to read historical fiction? These are books that are set partly in historical places, but partly in fictional places, in medieval England. But what I try to convey in the books is sort of what life would have been like for a peasant boy and other people, girls and monks, at this time in the Middle Ages. And I try to, bring it as close to what I would imagine that life was like, They learn about monasticism. They learn about the feudal system that was in Europe. They see the relationship between King Henry and the church, and just so many other details. And then there are some historical events that are that occur in the books, but they're more set in sort of a historical setting.
Okay, so here's my question. Now, for the listeners, I read book 1. Actually, I read that in 2 days, and it's not because it's a short book. It's just because I was really, captivated and enjoyed the book so much. I read the 2nd book also, and I've started the 3rd, but have, not gotten too far into that one, but basically, I've torn to the 1st one and got the 2nd one, and I'm not sure actually if I've read a historical fiction before. Maybe I've watched some historical fiction based movies, but a book I'm not so familiar with. I've read my share of nonfiction. I mean, I've read my share of fiction books, fantasy, sci-fi, apocalyptic. And that seems to really be what is really sort of inundating the fiction life, especially for teenagers, young adults. Got a lot of this fantasy, paranormal, futuristic. Why historical fiction for your story?
Well, partly because, well, we were a homeschooling family. So, of course, as those homeschoolers in your audience know, you always try to take pretty much everything in life and turn it into a learning experience when you're
Right,
a homeschooler.
right.
But so that was part of it. But I really love history, and I don't know why. I mean, I'm Italian. I don't know why I love English history, but for some reason, I love English history, and it's fascinating. Partly it's because I'm a lawyer, and in law school, we learn all about the English common law and the history of our own laws, which really go all the way back to the Middle Ages, just a few years after Zan with the Magna Carta. And so, I definitely have a connection to English history. In fact, in 2015, I took a trip up pretty much on my own and traipsed around the UK for a few weeks to try to do some more research and just kind of really get the vibe of England, so I could try to bring some of that to the books. But so I like English history. It's an interesting time. But there's also, I mean, it's the Middle Ages. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on there. There's knights and bandits, and there's monks, and people thought there were dragons still, and I mean, so even though it's not fantasy, in that setting, you can still concoct some pretty interesting, spooky stories, but still set them in a historical place.
Well, I can definitely attest to that from reading the first 2 books. I mean, you give a great sense of mystery. There's a lot of questions that are happening, and you're trying to figure out what's going on, who's responsible, what's going to happen. And, uh, from the standpoint of the main protagonist, Zan, you give this young boy a lot of strength, a lot of courage, especially in the first book, because as you noted, he's lost his memory, and he's trying so hard to find his way, and the monks are trying to help him, and he's encountering his day to day sort of life. But you give this young lad so much courage and sort of tenacity to want to try to do what's right, to figure out what's going on, and it feels really sort of that's an appealing character. You would sort of think most sort of young 11-year-olds might really kind of be afraid of the dark, as it were. And it's not that Zan isn't afraid, but he's sort of able to overcome his trials and his difficulties.
Yeah, and he's not that different than most teenagers I think that we might have in our lives, in our families. Uh, and I wanted him to not be all that different, but he does. He does have courage, but he also has to face his fears, and he's got several, pretty glaring character flaws that get brought out over the course of the books too. I mean, he's a like any of us, he's a flawed person who has a good heart and wants to do good, but also struggles with various things. And as you pointed out, he's had a rough go of things. He has these bandits that, he really doesn't care for very much for good reason. And he has a hard time, especially in book two, which is really about forgiveness. He has a hard time coping with, how can you forgive somebody who did such horrible things to you? And despite the monks trying to talk about Jesus' forgiveness and turning the other cheek and all that kind of thing, he doesn't think that makes much sense to him. And but at his core, though, he's a good kid. As so many of the teenagers that we know really are. And he's just trying to find his way, and that's really what the books are about. In some way, they're really just about how him and Lucy, his friend, the other main character, they're really just trying to find out, what does God want for my life, while they're going through sort of all these kind of spooky adventures.
And that's one of the things I really enjoyed about the books that I've read so far in the series. It's not just it's not a lot of things compared to what the rest of the secular world has sort of created as entertainment, whether it be books or movies or shows. It's not just a kind of nice and tidy and cleaned up sort of story where, it's all just sort of sunshine and happy. And even from a Christian perspective, you don't even make that completely easy. You don't make that sort of a fluffy sort of like, yeah, it's all easy. It's all about Jesus and let's just love Jesus and it's all okay and it's a great end, everyone lives happily ever after. You really introduce a lot of questions, especially from the character of Zan, from his standpoint. And I think a lot of young people would be in Zan's place. Questions of, trying to find out their real identity. Who am I? And then you bring in the faith aspect. Well, who is God to me? How can I do this? How can I forgive? Why isn't God helping me? Why am I suffering? Why are all these bad things happening? And you even leave at the end of the first book. Zan is not. In a TV show, as an example, you kind of tie everything up in about 30 minutes and everything. Oh, well, there was a problem. Now there's resolution. Let's move on to the next episode. You sort of leave Zan open for more development. Like it's not the end of the road for him at book one and everything's all clean and there's no issues. You really leave him still sort of looking and searching for a lot of inner peace, which still comes eventually in two, but then he's still got more to find out. So I, I I want to ask, was that sort of an intentional creation for Zan to not just sort of, yep, okay, everything's done, everything's fixed, and now Zan's perfect?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I've been living for 51 years and I'm still struggling, so I'm sure a teenager's going to be struggling. And I remember quite well my teenage years. And you have, some ups and you have some downs. And, I wanted to make an authentic character and not just him, the other characters too. Even his mentor, Brother Andrew, is not a perfect person. He seems kind of perfect at first, but you learn in book three that even Brother Andrew comes from sort of a dysfunctional family situation, um, and I wanted the story to be authentic and real, not some sugar coated candy. And let's face it, Jesus told us we were going to have to carry our cross, and so Christianity isn't all about everything being hunky dory all the time. It's about suffering, and we're all going to suffer in this life, and how do we deal with it? The only thing Christianity does, it gives us that knowledge that God is with us through it all, and He's going to bring good out of it somehow, and that's what Zan is experiencing as he goes through his life.
Right, right. Well, again, I think you tell a great story with Zan, and you do bring in sort of the carrying of the cross, as you said, and even uh, again, to wrap it into a young person such as Zan, when it would have said, "Well, he's a child. Let's make it easy for him." And when we write the story about an adult, or the adult characters can carry the crosses, but Zan's going to have an easy go of it. No, no, you went ahead and you chose to make sure that the readers, that the readers would know, hey, young people, as much as adults, are searching, looking, struggling, suffering, and they are trying to find their way to God as much as anyone else. So I really appreciate that aspect of the story. Now, I wanna I've we've been talking about how Zan, who's a young boy, we're talking about how he is being raised at an abbey, monks. There's a lot of male characters, and you've mentioned it, Lucy, but I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about the fact that it's not just a book for boys or young guys, right?
No, definitely not. And in fact, Loyola Press made it clear that the series needs to be a series that's going to appeal to girl readers and boy readers. And in fact, girls we know tend to be more voracious readers than boys in a lot of places. And
I
so,
agree. My wife is the voracious reader in the house. So yes, sir, you are absolutely correct.
yeah, so we have some great female characters throughout the series. Now, Lucy is about Zan's age. She's his best friend, and she's a very holy girl. I mean, Lucy has a lot of great qualities. In some ways, she's Zan's conscience. She's definitely a strong female character and a very good, good-hearted female character. But I mean, Zan is obviously the main character. What I decided to do with Lucy is I'm releasing a series of Lucy short stories. The first one just came out actually this week, Lucy and the Deadly Rule, where readers can get to know Lucy sort of apart from Zen, and actually see the world through her eyes, because most of the Harwood Mysteries are really through Zan's eyes, and so you see Lucy through his eyes. So I wanted to give our readers a chance to see Lucy through her own eyes also, and so there's some great girl characters. Lucy in book one. It stays throughout the series. Christina, he meets in book two. She's a lot more of a sort of a worldly girl. And then Sister Regina, one of the nuns at the abbey, really is a mother figure to Zan, and she's just wonderful, and definitely gives the kind of advice that you'd want a mother to give to a young boy.
And again, you said that Loyola sort of pressed you to make sure that the book would be appealing to boys and girls. And again, it would have been easy just to sort of say, "All right, well, I'm gonna throw in some girl characters, and that'll make the publisher happy." But no, you really gave some depth to the characters, especially I think within Lucy and Christina. Uh, saying Lucy's really the kind of a holy girl, Christina's more worldly, but they have their own. Again, you sort of introduce the flaws or the brokenness that they each have, how that sort of intertwines with Zan and his own conscience, and how he is sort of struggles in the relationship and the friendship with both of them. So it's not just something for the sake of. Like, you really do create these girl characters, and these female characters also with Sister Regina, to really have a role in the development of the story as well as Zan's own life.
Definitely. And we've talked a lot about the seriousness and the suffering and all that. There's actually I tried to also make sure there was enough lightness and levity in the series also. And
Oh, sure. Yep. Yep.
there are some characters that do that. Christina to me is one of those characters, because Zan just, he seems so taken by her that he can barely, get his words out straight when he's around her.
Right.
And then in book three, there's actually kind of a quirky cast of suspicious characters who are all potential thieves who stole the Fire of Eden, this jewel that gets stolen, and so they're definitely in between sort of all this seriousness and that kind of thing. I don't want the readers to get the impression that these books are so heavy
Oh, right. Right.
that that they're just going to be all seriousness. Yes, they're spooky, they're suspenseful, there's real life and real suffering, but there's also real hope. There's real joy. There's real, laughter with the characters, and some of the scenes that are, meant to be sort of some of that comic relief in between some of the seriousness.
And 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 also another section that I think is important, that is important to note, and you can expand upon it if you want, is we're talking about how Zan is being sort of raised at the abbey, and there's a bunch of monks, and of course he meets Lucy, who's with the nuns, but there's also a group of boys that more or less are orphans that reside at the abbey, and Zan has a fair amount of interactions with them, which really sort of brings Zan, he it makes Zan more sort of believable because, yes, he does encounter a lot, with adult characters throughout the series, but his sort of, interactions that happen off and on with the boys at the monastery, it really makes him a really believable boy.
Yeah, and his experience at the Abbey with these orphans, in my mind, is a lot like our teenagers' experience in their middle schools and high schools. There's always that kid who's like a bully, and there's the shy one, and there's the, just the good-hearted little one, and I mean, you've got all of these kinds of people that we've all encountered, as we're growing up and in our schools. And so Zan sort of is encountering the same thing, and in that way, I really was hoping that although this takes place, like 1,000 years ago, it's still sort of a current series. I was hoping that's what I was shooting for, because kids recognize, yeah, I mean, I get bullies at school too, and I've got really good kids, but they're afraid to stand up for themselves, and here's all of these kinds of teenage problems that come up, and yeah, they're kind of different problems today, but at the core, they're also the same problems that our teens are dealing with. And
Mhm.
so, Zan and his friends have to deal with those same issues.
Now let's talk a little bit here as we near the end. Let's talk about the book itself, not so much the story. So you explained why you chose historical fiction. You talked about a little bit about Loyola Press really helping to sort of bring that out in the book. The book is not just comprised of the story, which would have made perfect sense to me or to I think any other reader. You open it, you see your table of contents, you start chapter 1, you get to the end and that's it. That's over. But there's a lot more packed into these books, and more so much so that there's actually some something extra that Loyola's helping with the book, to make it not just a read at home type of story. So, can you first talk to me about what else is inside of the books, and then what Loyola's helping to do with the books to sort of cover greater ground?
Yeah, these are books because they're historical fiction. And Loyola Press, if you don't know, has a lot of curriculum materials that they already market to schools and to CCD classes and this kind of thing. And so they already are in the business of sort of putting out school-related educational products. And so this book really, this whole series fits well into a curriculum dealing with the Middle Ages, dealing with the Crusades, feudalism, whatever, monasticism in the Middle Ages, which are all topics that our kids have to learn about in school. And so what we did is in between the covers of the books, there is, of course, the section on how do you read historical fiction. I've talked about that. There's a historical section that I wrote after each story, which sort of after the reader's already sort of seen the fiction part of it, I sort of show what was really the history that this was based on, or the historical situations that this was based on. There's a glossary of terms, and then Loyola has developed curriculum materials for teachers, for homeschool groups, for book clubs, so that we could use this as like a supplemental reading. I remember when I was in high school, my English literature class had us read The Hobbit as sort of a supplemental book. And that's how I sort of envision this series being able to be used in learning for, especially for middle schoolers, because they tend to hit some of those topics in their social studies class.
So then I'm understanding all this correctly. You could simply just buy the series, for personal enjoyment and read it, have some extra information from your explanations of, how to read historical fiction, what actually took place that happened in history, the glossary, have a little bit of extra learning attached to it. Or you could take the series and plug it into a teaching curriculum, whether that's potentially at a private school or as a homeschool curriculum, and sort of help spread out some teachings potentially on, social studies and English history or the the system that existed for the people. So it's a great balance, really, for a fiction story to sort of do that. I think most times, if you read a book in English class in middle school or high school, you just read it. There's no extra sort of attached curriculum, and then the teacher just sort of says, "Hey, write a paper about it," and you're sort of done with it. But I appreciate that the book can sort of grow from a simple book for entertainment to actually helping to blend out to an entire curriculum for a particular grade level. I mean, that's a pretty good run for just a single book.
Yeah, and of course it's hopefully right now it's four books and hopefully a few more coming after that. But yeah, that's exactly what I was shooting for. I mean, and like you said, you could just pick up the series and read it like Harry Potter or Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson books, and just enjoy the stories for what they are, because they are spooky, suspenseful adventure stories. Or, like you said, and as a homeschooler, this is what we did when we first started homeschooling, right? You start developing your own curriculum, you look for other books that are out there that the kids could read, but you want it to be something the kids will enjoy, otherwise they're going to complain. And that's kind of what I was going for, especially at the time when I started writing this. Was I was writing the book that I wish was there when I was trying to teach my kids in middle school as a homeschooler. I mean, it's kind of the series that I was writing, that would do all of those things. And that's probably why it took 15 years and a lot of help from Loyola and others to I think, finally, I think, hit the right balance.
Well, I think it worked, and I think your efforts and your patience have paid off with this book, and so much so that I want to make this sort of appeal to the listeners. Now, you heard that Tony said in the beginning, as he was talking about how he came into writing, how he joined the Catholic Writers Guild. Now, so you have a Catholic author who has joined the Catholic Writers Guild, and this book itself has, or at least I believe the first one in the series is an award-winning book. So, which awards has it won, Tony?
I have been so thrilled and humbled by the reception of Shadow in the Dark. Now, the other books haven't yet had a chance to be evaluated in awards, but Shadow was the first one that came out. We right now are four awards and counting. There's still a few more to come out, but it's won the Moonbeam Children's Book Awards. It won the Independent Publishers Book Awards, the Association of Catholic Publishers Excellence in Publishing Award, and the Illumination Awards. And some of those are secular, some are Christian, some are Catholic. So it's kind of covered all grounds. And it's won a few gold medals, some bronze medals. I've just been so thrilled. Every author wonders, like, is what I wrote any good? And getting published is one thing, but when you get that affirmation from critics and those who are judging, you realize, wow, this actually it's pretty good, and it makes me feel good.
Okay, so you heard the list of awards that this book has gotten and potentially more to come, and that's only on the first book. So my appeal to the listeners is this is not just a book that was written and that exists out there in the world and that I'm telling you I read and it's good. This book has won awards. And if you are serious or concerned about what kind of book should your young person be reading, whether it's your children or nieces or nephews or grandchildren, here's a book that has won awards. It is a Catholic young adult book, Catholic teen book. It has sort of the stamps of approval that maybe you would have wanted to see on a book for your young person. So be assured that this book, this series, is on the right path. It's good literature. It's good material. It's entertaining. Your child can learn something from the book, It covers all of the bases. So please, if you're interested, I encourage you to go find the books, find the stories, and where can they go to find the books, Tony?
Yeah, and you can go to several places. Of course, you can go to Loyola Press's website. You can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can check out my website, antonykolenc.com, or the harwoodmysteries.com. Or you could go to your Catholic bookstore nearby and ask them to stock it if they don't already stock it, and give your support to the Catholic bookstores. But I wanted to add one thing. Hearing what you just said, most of your listeners, I'm assuming, are not teenagers or middle schoolers. I mean,
Sure,
they're probably
sure.
parents and grandparents, and they are probably looking for books to buy for gifts, and never know what to buy for kids. Not only is my series, I think, really good for this, but there is a website called CatholicTeenBooks.com, which is there's about 16 of us authors. My series is one of the books on there, but there is actually a lot more good Catholic literature out there for our teenagers than we ever realized, at least than I ever realized when I started writing. And I think there's been almost a blossoming of Catholic, YA fiction in this last decade since I've been involved with it. And so I would encourage your listeners to also go out and check out, CatholicTeenBooks.com, and see what other great books there are for teens out there.
On that note, if this is your first time tuning in, look back just a few episodes. I interviewed one of the other authors from CatholicTeenBooks.com, T.M. Gowett. Wonderful, wonderful person, great writer, and she has a lot more kind of present day young adult fiction. But I, I'm advocating for this website. Go to CatholicTeenBooks.com if you're looking for maybe some other varieties, other genres, some other options. If you're looking for good literature that is all sort of on point and that you could trust what's coming out of there. So thanks, Tony, for that nod to Catholic Teen Books. As we wrap up here, Tony, I'm always interested in people such as writers or their other creative types who they've sort of found their way to sort of, I don't want to say the end of the road, but you found your way to where you have gotten your writing published. And I think there's other people out there who want to write. There's people out there who are interested, or there's people who have written something, but they're afraid. They're worried about what might happen. They care about their story. They don't want to let it go, but they'd love to sort of get published. What's your words of encouragement or something that you can offer, being someone who's wanted to write most of your life, spent 15 years working on a particular series, now you're sort of seeing the fruits of your labor? What advice could you share to the listeners about how to go about pursuing writing?
Thank you for that. Yeah, first of all, like you said earlier, don't give up. This is a lifelong journey being a writer. And the stuff you write when you start, yeah, you're going to have fun with it, but it's probably not going to be the best thing in the world. It's going to take time to sort of hone your skills. And so my second piece of advice is find yourself a writers group, either online or in your local area. Obviously, the Catholic Writers Guild is both a national and local organization, but there's Christian writers associations, there's secular ones in every genre. You've got to connect with other writers. There's a lot of material out there, a lot of instruction on how to be a good writer, how to write fiction, and it's that interaction and networking that will help you to succeed. For me, that's what made the difference when I finally started really moving in those circles and really, trying to learn the art of writing a fiction novel. And it took me a long time. And I was already what I thought to be a good writer. I was a lawyer, I'm a law professor. Like, you think I'd be able to write, but, it took me a long time to really get the hang of writing a novel. And so don't give up, interact with others, be encouraged. That's why going to a Christian or a Catholic group is great, because you can encourage each other to stay the course, and just offer it up to God. I mean, if God wants you to be a success, you'll be a success, and if not, you'll have a good time in the process. Either way.
Right, right. God will be our constant companion on whatever it is that we're doing. Well, Tony, I really have enjoyed the conversation. I'm hoping that the listeners will be interested enough to go pick up one of your books. And I want to reemphasize what Tony said. Yeah, go if you have a local Catholic bookstore, little Catholic shop. Go in, support them. Help them to stay afloat. I'm sure that they would appreciate it. And there's other. If you've never been to a Catholic shop, there's a lot more there than what you might think, and that's been my experience at least. So I encourage you to go if you've never been, and if they don't have it, like Tony said, ask if they'll pick up the book and stock it. So try that option if it's an option for you. But Tony, thanks so much for taking some time to write the series, to stick it out, to create this series. And so thank you for that. But also thank you just for taking some time today to talk about the series and giving us a little bit more insight into what to look forward to in the book and the books to come.
Yeah, I really appreciate you have me on the show, and I'd be glad to come back sometime in the future and talk some more because I think it's important both for me and for your listeners to be exposed to these kinds of things. So thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, I'd love to pick up with you again and see where we're at within the Harwood Mysteries down the road. See where the characters go. See what new things maybe you're up to. So yeah, we will definitely keep in touch. Ladies and gentlemen, again, we've been talking with Antony Barone Kolenc, an author, an award-winning author, mind you. I will make sure I note that. Please look up the Harwood Mysteries. And again, as he noted, book 3 is coming out here in July, so that'll be coming out here real soon, so keep an eye out for that. And just in general, ladies and gentlemen, try to support Catholic authors. They're doing good work to create good literature for you to enjoy and for your young people to enjoy. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you will tune in again to the table of content. And until that time, be good, stay safe, peace.